Hello folks, welcome to another exciting edition of Iron Horse Weekly. We're going to be doing a bit of a challenge this week. Hunter's Yard and I are both weathering the same locomotive. That's a Hornby Q1. We're both going to use our own techniques and see whose is not best, but what do you guys think? We'll be a link in the description to his video as well. But before we go there, we're going to have a look at couplings. More specifically, what alternative do you realistically have to the awful tension lock purgatory we seem to be stuck in this day and age? Still, we are stuck with tension locks. Let's see how we go on. Now, I can't help but feel we've been here before talking about couplings. This is the Humble tension lock coupling. This is one of the newer, more slimline ones. And as you can see, this is a cranked variant. That is another issue as well about coupling heights not being uniform in this day and age, but I digress. So let's say, for example, like a lot of people, you are just left massively underwhelmed by this and you want your new Bachmann locomotive at £200 to have a much nicer representation of a coupling. What options do we have? We're going to narrow it down slightly to realistic ones. Let's have a look at the first type. Now, on the back of my Hornby Q1 here, you'll see arguably one of the more popular types of coupling available today, and that is the magnetic type. It puts you in mind of the old wooden trains you used to have when you was a child, but they actually work pretty well. Now, what are the pros and cons of these over a more traditional tension lock style coupling? Number one, they connect really easily. This wagon here is a god-awful offering from EFE, and despite looking the part and everything else, I found it runs pretty poorly. We'll get into that later on. But as you can see, you've got the magnet here and here. And all you need to do is just push it close, and then the magnet does its own thing and connects up nicely. Then you knock it off the track. The next issue is one that isn't really just unique to magnetic couplings, but you can see there, because of the length and the positioning of the NEM pocket on this particular wagon and the length of the magnet coupling that I've used, when this loco and wagon go around a curve, and this curve that they're on is only a third radius, so it's not like it's super tight, you are going to get buffer lock. You can just see that there on the inside one there. It's going to get worse, and as we draw the locomotive forward, you'll see that happen now. You can just see it start to happen now. There we are, and those buffers have locked, and when the loco, there you go, derailment, frustration for days. Now, the way to fix that is quite simple. All you need to do is fit a longer magnet, right? That'd work. So let's try a longer magnet on this train. Okie dokie, so I've now fitted a longer magnetic coupling, and as you can see now, when we join them up, we actually have a nice size gap between the buffers, and when we reverse the loco, you can now see that there's no danger of those couplings interlocking or causing problems, and the issue has now resolved itself. I know Charlie over at Charbet Muller Railway did something very similar to this when he was sorting out his helix. You will have to play with different manufacturers and versions of magnetic couplings, and also various different lengths depending on where your NEM pockets sit on your wagon or loco. Another issue you can have with magnetic couplings would be this. So we have two magnetic couplings here, one by Westall Wagon Works, and these ones are by a gentleman who owns Porterhouse Models, who operates on eBay. These tend to be half the price of the Westall Wagon Works ones, but they work just as well. Also, you need to bear in mind, if you're going around again a curve which is too tight, or for example into a standard peak or point, if the couplings don't have enough movement in the NEM pocket, what will happen is the couplings will start to do this, start to separate, which of course weakens the magnetic connection, and then you're going to get undesired uncouplings, which we spoke about very briefly in a previous video of mine. Another issue of course with magnetic couplings is you cannot have automatic uncoupling. You do have to do this to uncouple with them, and depending where you park your wagons, they're going to automatically uncouple, so you can't just have the wagon sat behind the loco waiting for the loco to move away, because it's just going to couple up. So you're going to have a little bit more space. See, even that's too close. You're going to have a good gap between the loco and the wagon to have it sat around. Great if you're running fixed rates of trains, superb. Maybe not so fantastic if you're running a shunting layout or whatever and you want remote coupling, so do bear that in mind. You can also get pivoting magnetic couplings, which do work really well, and these will help the long wagons get around tight curves and corners, as long as the distance between the two buffers is generous enough. When they're curved or bent like this, then you're not going to have any buffer lock. Again, this isn't a West Hill Wagons Works one. It's actually a really early offering from Porterhouse Models, and they've actually improved their design a lot in the newer versions. I know Curoscale have recently released some magnetic couplings as well for their children wagons. These are really nicely detailed ones. The problem with these is they're just not strong. They're not strong enough at all to use with anything other than the children wagons for which they were designed. If you have the chains like this attached to, say for example, a hook like you would normally find on the back of a locomotive with a magneton of this size, that would work a lot better. See that one? What's this? Connect to it straight away. So maybe for Curoscale, watch this video. There's a big money idea for you there at Curoscale. Make these with proper size chains and a decent sized magnet on the end, and I think we could be on to a winner. Now, let's move on to the next one. The next couplings, as modelled by my Bachmann Class 24 here, are Kadees, specifically NEM pocket compatible Kadees. I think it's worth pointing out at this stage that most of the issues that befall tension lock couplings and magnetic couplings, and indeed Kadees, are all shared in terms of you want the length of the coupling to come just beyond the buffers to avoid buffer lock or buffer clash. That is not an exclusive problem to any type of coupling, and depending on the curvature of your track and how extreme your point work is and everything else, that will largely decide on what type of couplings you can get away with on your layout. So do bear that in mind. Now, let's have a look at this, shall we? Okay, so here we are. We are now fitted with a Kadee coupling onto the little EFE wagon. Hopefully this will become apparent. When you look at the two of these, the height difference is quite astonishing. I mean, they are never ever going to work, are they? That is never ever going to couple up to that. So straight away, the problem you're going to have with Kadees, knowing full well that manufacturers do not want to make their NEM pockets a universally accepted height between manufacturing brands and this and that and the other, that is a problem you're going to have to fix, and it means either lowering that or making this one higher. But looking at where the pocket is on that, it's going to require a lot of faffing about. Look how floppy that is. That is appalling. Anyway, it's going to require a lot of adjusting, a lot of faffing about, just to get that even remotely usable. There you go, look. It's not great, and if you go around a corner with a bend that's got a slight dip in it, that can just quite happily unhook itself, and away you go again. But Kadee couplings do offer a really neat feature in that they automatically uncouple. You can get magnets in the track and you can park your locos neatly, and then these little jaws move to one side and they unhook and they uncouple, and you don't have to get yourself involved with it. So if you're willing to put in the work of adjusting all of your coupling heights across your entire fleet of models and locomotives, or simply having fixed rakes and then one connecting wagon at each end, and willing to pay the rather steep cost, or comparatively steep cost, for what NEM Kadee couplings cost, then these do seem like a really nice option. For me though, they're just a little bit too much messing around involved for me to really get any sort of enjoyment or benefit out of them. And I have to say, I would sooner pick magnetic couplings over these. Automatic uncouplings never something that's really struck me as a requirement on my railway, or indeed any other railway I like to get involved, so me just simply pulling the wagon apart is a lot more desirable than having to get the local parts in the right place and then back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and forth and back and forth until you get it in the right spot. So for me, Kadees, unfortunately, just aren't the right solution for what I'm looking for. But they are good if you've got the space for them, you can afford the pocket for them, and you don't mind doing quite a bit of messing about and adjusting with them. So there we are. You're also supposed to be able to automatically uncouple them as well with a pencil. You shove the pencil in there, twist it around, and it's supposed to come undone. These won't even couple up though, so what can you do? So what other options have we got then? Sprat and winkle? Well, that involves even more messing about, and you have to actually start modifying your wagons permanently, cutting things off, making holes, etc, etc, etc. So sprat and winkle, again, it's not an avenue I want to be going down. I don't know there's people out there that have done well with it, but for me, sprat and winkle isn't an option either. So where do we stand? What can we do? Well, there is one other option that I've looked at and considered, and I quite like it, and I think it'll surprise you. Let's have a look. Yes, that's right. Nothing new, but 3-link couplings. You have to do them by hand. It's incredibly fiddly. It's incredibly difficult to see. You get buffer lock if your points and curves are too tight and narrow. You get buffer clash if they're too quick around the corners. So why? Why would you use them? Well, it's quite simple. To my eye, they look the best. Real railway wagons are connected by chains. Now, I know there's going to be issues with propelling these backwards around sharp curves, but think back to what I said earlier in this video. Depending on your point work and your track work and the severity of your curves, you can actually get away with this. And I've tested and tested and tested. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you will know there is more than 3 links in there, but look at the length and the distance between those buffers there. Now on that one, there is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chain links. Work really well. Just make sure your points and curves are within tolerances, you know, 3rd degree or more. Anyway, let's move on and see just how hard these are to actually couple with. So with this task in mind, I've actually made myself a little uncoupling tool. This is a simple device made from some copper wire, or brass wire should I say, and an X cotton swab with the swabs chopped off and the hook shoved in the end there, with a tiny bend at the end there. And if I can do this now, I'll just show you how we go about doing this. Unhooking them is actually a lot easier than coupling them up. As you saw there, I got that undone pretty quickly. Now, bear in mind, I'm trying to hold a camera and show you how easy this is, so don't expect this to go well or smoothly at all. Pick it up, hook it on the hook, and away we go. And that is now on there. Nice and smooth. Now, bear in mind, the hooks on these Hornby MHA wagons aren't the best. They're a little bit small, so the chain links don't exactly fall into them as easy as they do on the Accurascale ones, which I've got up here. You see those there. The curve scale ones work much easier because the hooks are much more of a prototypical size. But there you have it. That wasn't difficult at all. It was nice and quick, nice and simple, and most importantly, it was fairly prototypical. So yes, surprise, surprise, for me, the best type of coupling I can recommend for you, or at least for me, would be 3 links. Not on the grounds that they're easy to uncouple or easy to couple up with, and not on the grounds that you can automatically uncouple of them, but because they look right. And when you propel the train around 2nd or 3rd degree curves, we have no buffer lock with these wagons here. Again, longer wagons you do have to take into consideration, and for those, this is where the magnetic couplings would come into play. So a little bit of forethought needs to go into how you set up your trains and whereabouts you put your fixed rakes, if you will. The Talbots, which I will just bring into shot now, as mentioned previously, they have got 5 links on them, not 3. If there were 3 links, they'd be up to there, and that would just be far too tight, even for the most prototypically length and sized layout curves. And we are just connected there with a tension lock to go into the back of the curve scale wagons. I could indeed 3 link them on that as well, but at the minute we are going through what you might call a testing period. So let's see how this entire train does being propelled into a siding. Now let's just first investigate the siding. The first curve it has to go through is a Pico set track left hand point. I believe this is a small or medium radius one, and the second point is a SL medium radius with a 19 degree turn out rate, so it's much smoother, much closer to prototypical, and you'll see how the wagons behave differently as well. The curve is somewhere between 2 and 3, 2nd and 3rd radius should I say. Let's see how we get on. Okay, so coming in there we have the buffers came close to locking, and again this is that Pico set track point. When you're pulling them, there's no issue at all. So if you're only ever going to have trains pulled, then you could actually get away with 3 link couplings, no issue at all. But when you come to propelling, pushing, you see the buffers match up, and there we see they're almost disconnecting. See that? They're almost coming apart. But because they are just the right length and the buffers are just the right size, and my curvature of my points is again correct, they're going to go around that point now, around that curve, and it's the same with the other ones. The Kadee's there, again the same with these guys, no issues at all. And we know that they've gone through that one, of course they're going to get through the streamline points, no issues at all, no problems there. And again, you see down this end, no problems at all. You're more likely to get the tension lock couplings causing issues. But as you can see, the buffers are all touching, but they are absolutely in no danger of locking. And I can push that entire train in, knowing that there'll be no issues whatsoever with derailing or uncoupling. Now, clearly I know that not everyone is going to be able to get away with 3 link coupling. Some of you lads and lasses out there have got diminishing eyesight. Mine isn't the best at the minute. I'm rapidly approaching 40 years of age, so my eyesight is starting to dim, especially in this one here. It's not as crystal clear as it used to be. But for the time being, at least, these work really well, and it cost me pennies. Finding the right size chain is easy to do. You can upgrade your older wagons to have slightly larger hooks than is considered to be prototypical, but it's much easier with a more welcoming hook head. Hook head, is that a thing? Rather than, you know, squinting and struggling. And I did find it easier with the Acura scale hooks because they're much more prototypical. They're a lot easier to get on and off with the chain links and what have you. So for me, certainly on my layout, 3 links do actually seem to be a really viable and most importantly cost effective and realistic option for my coupling needs. And where I can't get away with it, then we can look at magnetic couplings as well. Usually the pivoting type is better because if the bars again are too long and you go on a third radius curve, you're going to get that braking, and then even possibly the bogies riding up on the rails and derailing because there's just not enough space on that radius of curve. But I think now we have to sadly come to the realisation that tension lock couplings, at least in the United Kingdom, are always going to be with us in some way, shape or form. We're never ever going to be able to get rid of them now. They've been here since near enough the dawn of time, and I think they're going to be here for a lot longer as well. Out of the box, they do work better than Kadees. There's very little you have to do in the way to get them work with more stock. My Dapol Class 68, for example, suffers from the couplings being inexplicably lower than every other piece of roller stock I have, and I just can't fathom why it's such an issue. Why are manufacturers having this problem? Why can't the coupling heights be the same? Why is it a problem? I have no idea. Acura Scale, Hornby, Dapol, Bachmann, please listen to us. Just make them the same height, please. It's all we want. It'd make everything much easier, and I won't have to make videos like this to bore people with. But what are your thoughts? Do you like the 3-link couplings? Do you prefer magnetics, Kadees? Are you into Spratt & Winkle? Or do you prefer the traditional big old D-link couplings you got from back in the day, back in the 70s and 80s? Or the old trio ones, the old ones that did sort of like a Kadee but you couldn't move them. Those old style ones. What do you think? Do let me know. So, that said folks, hopefully you've been enlightened slightly. We're going to move on with the rest of the video. So earlier in the month, a chap called Bunter's Yard, some of you may have heard of him, made a video where he showed us his box of locomotives and rolling stock he hadn't yet weathered. I noticed in that box there was a Hornby Q1, the same Q1 which I have. I messaged him and said it might be fun if we both did a video at the same time showing how we both weather our individual locomotives, and then you folks at home can see which one you prefer and which bits you like from whose and what have you. So let's take a look at that now, shall we? So the first thing I'm going to do is just add some real coal to the back of this loco. It had a plastic moulding which looks a bit naff, so I simply put some ballast in there, covered it with a bit of weathering powder, and here we are, realistic coal. Looks a lot better, and I used what I have to hand. Alright, so this video is already pretty long, so for the sake of saving time, we're going to play the video in a sped up state, if you will. You'll still see the whole process from start to finish. On one side of the loco and the roof, so the rest of the techniques you see in this video will also be carried out on the other side of the loco as well. Pretty boring watching the same thing done on the other side as well. Anyway, let's begin. As you can see, we're starting with a little bit of Humbrol smoke powder there, just to give a little bit of variation to the tone of the factory finished paintwork on the model. And especially when you're weathering like a steam locomotive or something which is all black, it's quite hard to get variations in tone. And I find using this nice grey weathering powder just helps bring that forward. It also gives us a nice bit of a base coat to work with as well, so when we add some black on top of it we get even more variation in tone and depth, and the other weathering powders we're using will stick better to a base of powders already in place. Then of course a little bit of matte lacquer to key the surface, and then we just dab onto the surface a little bit of the black weathering powder as well, and then you'll just start to see the tones building up there. Now, the bodies of the Q1s weren't actually steel. I believe they were some sort of fiberglass composite thing with aluminium outers, so the rust isn't really going to be too heavy on the body sides. The underframe and things are still made from steel as far as I'm aware. So when we got to those parts, we can go crazy with the old rust, but for now we'll just put some tractor on there, just building up the grime. And again, it looks quite stark and contrasted now, but we will blend that in with our big fluffy brush in a little moment there. So there we are, and you can just sort of see how it looks once it's been blended across. And we can add a little bit of calcium deposit on the on those valve covers there, whatever they are, these little spouts where the water seems to come out of. And again, we're just sort of making a roadmap. We're going to go back and touch these up later on, blend them out, fade them away, maybe make them stronger as well. And this is the best thing about using the powders, is you've got a lot of working time with them. As long as you don't set them immediately, you can blend them out really nicely. Now what we're going to do here is just take a little bit of the matte coat you get from Humbrol and just apply it to the underframe. And what this will do is it really allows the powders to be pushed into the surface, and it gives it a really nice textured look, and it allows you to blend your colours on the model much easier, and you can work in layers easier, and you really get some nice colour changes and variations in tone and texture, and it looks really nice. For me, it is much better to do it like this and spend the extra 10-15 minutes cleaning the wheels and contacts rather than using an airbrush. For me, I don't think an airbrush can give you quite the level of texture that powders can. Just pushing them in there with that matte lacquer base just helps the whole process come together. Now, like I said, the body of these isn't steel or anything like that, so you won't get a lot of rust, but what you will get is rust from other areas, from rivets and inside the loco, pushed out with water flow and things like that. So that's what we're sort of doing here, just blending a little tiny bit of rust tones in with the black, with the whites, just to give, again, more variation. So now we're going to set our focus on the roof of the model, and what I'm doing here is just applying the Humbrol matte coat a little bit thicker than I have previously. And what this is going to do again is give us that nice sticky base for our powders to play with. Starting again with the smoke powder. I know it looks quite heavy and contrasted at the minute, but once we balance it back out again with a bit more black, it's really going to blend the tone down again and give us a nicely warm, faded, dirty roof kind of look that you often see with really old steam locomotives. This one in particular is being modelled in its twilight years. It's coming up towards the end of steam. It's survived somehow, and as such the owners at the depot can't really be bothered to clean it, so it's scabby, if you will, and again not really rusty, just adding dirt, grime, soot from the chimney and what have you, building it up layer after layer, a little bit of lacquer there just to soften it down again, and then we can build up a little bit of rust tone around the safety valves and what have you as well. And again, you want a fair bit of powder on your brush for this, but not too much. And don't forget to add a little bit of streaking in there as well. And don't forget, we can also blend that down with other rust tones as well as black and smoke, and we can really blend it all together, mix it in to give it a really encrusted and filthy look. This is what you want to do if you want something really heavy. For lighter weathering, you really wouldn't need to go this aggressive with the powder or the airbrush or the acrylics or what have you. You just do a little and often, but since we're going all out with this one, if you will, we can just really get messy with it, do a lot of blending on the piece, adding some more rust tones in there, just to get a bit of variation. Moving to the front of the loco now with the saw bar, the smoke box. Again, we're starting with the matte coat just to give us that nice sticky base again, and then we're going to start adding the same techniques as we did before, where we're going to put the smoke on there as well as matte black powders, and then we're going to mix in some rust powder and then also a little bit of white just to represent ashes and stains and things when the smoke box has been opened, cleaned and what have you. I'm just going to use a bit of IPA to clean back the running number there, and a few finishing touches on this side. Then we're going to work on the other side and then take a look at the final finished product. It's really important once you've weathered your model, even if you've just used acrylics or whatever, you have to give them a bit of a run and a clean afterwards, just to get the powders and remnants and things away. And as you can see, this little beauty has no issues running around at a fairly slow speed, no problems at all, because the cleaning process is an important part of the weathering process as well. Hopefully these photos do the model justice. Nothing ever looks quite the same on a photo as it does in real life, but hopefully you can see the subtle differences in shade and tone and what have you, and hopefully I've done it proud. Now then, let's have a look at what Bunter's Yard's done. You'll find a link to his video in the description, And until then folks, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe.